to be folded under, and then this attached at the folded under position. Okay, got it. That's not bad. On the whole, no disasters. Seems to lie okay. I could put the fasteners where the clips are. I get them a little bit equidistant. Gotta remember to fold this over and sew it. This all seems good. Oh yes, well, I am still here. That in answer to the no fewer than 3 messages yesterday saying, are you still here? What happened to you? Are you still with us? Yes, I'm still with us. And I'm making new canvas for the whole boat after 8 years, I think it is. It's about the lifespan of Sambrella. New tail cover, new weather cloths, and all the stuff. And one of the reasons I haven't been sailing is that I'm working on another book project, which with luck will be finished in a year or so. But in the meantime, since it's the holiday season, I thought I would append to this little video my previous reviews and discussions of sailing books over the years, because they make such wonderful holiday gifts for fellow travelers, as it were. And all the way from 1900 and Joshua Slocum up to the present day. So I'll clip on here those discussions, recommendations, reviews, if you like, of books. And as for my own books, which we oughtn't forget about, I'll just list those in the description of YouTube. So off we go back to the sewing machine. Happy holidays. And I am still here, and we'll be sailing again soon. Let's go over a few sailing novels. We've already treated probably the best contemporary novelist of our time, Patrick O'Brian, and I dare not even mention Moby Dick, the great piece of literature that confounds every attempt to compete with it, or even my own book, my own new novel, Rarotonga, which is just out a month ago. You know, something has changed in the books that we read about sailing in the sea. They're mostly nonfiction now. I think because the adventures that we follow today in the news and on television are quite different than they were at the heyday of the imaginative story. Everybody goes off adventuring now with a GoPro camera. People are quite literate. They keep notes. In many cases they are sponsored, and the result is an almost endless stream of true adventure stories. But the non-fiction books that we read by the hundreds leave something out, and that is the imaginative capacity and capability of a novelist taking on the same subjects. And at the turn of the century, nearly 120 years ago, this was the stock in trade of communication, and I have 4 to recommend. The first is Joseph Conrad's Typhoon, and this book is Typhoon and Other Tales. It also includes several other good short stories. But the story Typhoon has always been a favorite of mine. It's about Captain McWhirr, a rather stolid man, unimaginative, who is the captain of a pretty beat-up freighter crossing the China Sea with a cargo of 200 Chinamen, yes, coolies. All 4 of these books were written about 1900, and they have the assumptions and attitudes of the time, which personally, as a reader, I accept as, it's their Geist, their spirit of their time, and we can learn from it without imitating it. In any case, those Chinamen present quite a problem to a ship at the height of a typhoon, and Conrad is very clever about describing how this unimaginative captain pulls through. There's a terrifying scene in it, at least for me. They think they've gone through the worst of the typhoon because the sun came out and the winds dropped down, and Captain McWhirr turns to his mate and says, "The worst is yet to come," of course on the other side of the anticyclone. Typhoon by Joseph Conrad. Another classic, which I was unfamiliar with until last year of the period, is Erskine Childer's The Riddle of the Sands, a record of secret service. For some reason, everybody had read this book but me. Vibrant, impassioned, witty, intelligent, and shamelessly prejudiced in the manner of the day. Well, they're all like that. I wasn't entirely persuaded by the spy aspect of The Riddle of the Sand by Erskine Childers. What I liked was something completely unfamiliar to me, which is that this story takes place in a 30-foot boat with bilge keels, so that it can sit upright when the tide goes out, in an area of the world that our European friends probably are very familiar with, but I'm not, and that is the tidal sands off the great estuaries at about the intersection of Holland and Germany, just south of, what used to be called Schleswig-Holstein, I guess. These big rivers like the Elbe are estuaries, and they go into the North Atlantic there and form vast sandbanks that go out 10 miles offshore, so that you can anchor 10 miles offshore, off the Frisian Islands, and when the tide goes out, as this book describes us, for as far as the eye can see, there are nothing but sandbanks. And you can navigate these channels by, if you know just where they lay, which just might be important in wartime, or so Carruthers and Davies, the heroic occupants of this leaky 30-foot boat, hope to discover for their secret service end. Well, Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson is supposed to be a children's book, of course, and there are more children among us than we thought, if that's true, because I reread this last year on a long car trip in which I was alone and was completely charmed once again. This is the introduction to the world by Robert Louis Stevenson of Long John Silver, and the story is told through the eyes of young Jim. And he happens to come into possession of very important information about the treasure map. And here's how he does it: by falling into an apple barrel. I got bodily into the apple barrel and found there was scarce an apple left, but sitting there in the dark, what with the sound of the waters and the rocking movement of the ship, I had either fallen asleep or was at the point of doing so when a heavy man sat down with rather a clash close by. The barrel shook as he leaned his shoulders against it, and I was just about to jump up when the man began to speak. It was Silver's voice, and before I had heard a dozen words, I would not have shown myself for all the world, but lay there trembling and listening in the extreme of fear and curiosity. For from these dozen words I understood that the lives of all the honest men aboard depended upon me alone. Now, these guys knew how to tell a story. Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. Captains Courageous by Rudyard Kipling. Another book written in about 1900, we've all heard of, but if you haven't reread it lately, it will bring a tear to your eye. Captains Courageous, I don't have the book with me, is, as you probably recall, the story of young Harvey, who's about 15, who falls off an ocean liner and is rescued by a Gloucester fisherman, skippered by one Disco Troop, one of the coolest guys in the history of the sailing literature. And here is the introduction to Harvey. He was dressed in a cherry-colored blazer, knickerbockers, red stockings, and bicycle shoes, with a red flannel cap at the back of his head. After whistling between his teeth as he eyed the company of men aboard the steamship, he said in a high, loud voice, "Say, it's thick outside. You can hear them fish boats squawking all around us. Say, wouldn't it be great if we ran one down? Well, it is after that he falls overboard into the clutches and the rescue of one of those Gloucester steamers. Captain's Courageous is a wonderful book. It's also a sensationally good movie to the highest standards, made by Victor Fleming, directed by Victor Fleming, with Spencer Tracy as Manuel. And it contains, that is, Captain's Courageous, the movie, real footage of Gloucester fishing schooners in action on the Grand Banks, and especially of their race home to Gloucester at the end of the story. Now, nonfiction books still dominate, and I thought to bring along this year four that you might not have heard about. And the first of these is something a book I was introduced to only 5 or 6 years ago by my friends in the Pacific Northwest, called The Curve of Time by M. Wylie Blanchet, or however she pronounces it, written in 1927. Blanchet is a woman who moved to Vancouver, and they had a 25-foot motorboat, and her husband went off on it one day and never came back. He drowned. Nobody knows why. They had 5 children. Instead of selling the boat, which I think most people would do out of grief, she took her 5 children for the next 15 years, 6 of them on this boat, and lived for months at a time in summers exploring British Columbia in the 1920s. She's a wonderful writer, evocative, not sentimental. And the things she puts her 5 children through, and they do it without complaint, are extraordinary. They're cold all the time. Their anchor often slips. They go off hiking to visit hermits. They discuss with some alacrity and period sensibilities the Indians of the time, and British Columbia's changed entirely since then. And this book is a wonderful evocation of what it was like before civilization really got its grip. The Curve of Time, M. Wylie Blanchet. Of nonfiction books, curiously, 2 years before the Mast, very well known, but for some reason, a half dozen of my friends report reading this again within the last couple of years. It's by Richard Henry Dana Jr., and as you recall, 2 years before the Mast, he was a college student at Harvard at the time, and I think he was diagnosed with bad eyesight, and they said, "You need a sea voyage, young man." So he signed on before the Mast on a ship that collected skins off of the California coast. And it's true that the people I'm citing who've read it live in Southern California. Why? We don't know what work is today. These guys were unloading sealskins waist deep all winter, working 12, 15 hours a day. And as an insight into what it was like to go on a sailing ship as your summer job back then, nothing beats 2 years before the Mast, and it's quite well written too. Rockwell Kent is a famous artist, as you know, an illustrator, and this is a book of his about his. It's called North by East, and it's the story of his yachting voyage to Greenland. In this book is told the story of an actual voyage to Greenland in a small boat, of a shipwreck there, and of what, if anything, happened afterwards, some of which may or may not have happened, not to knock Rockwell Kent's imagination, but this is supposed to be a first-hand account. I cite it because if you can find an edition with his prints in it, and I think you can online, they're an extraordinary, when it comes to illustration, you can't beat Rockwell Kent. At 2:30 in the afternoon, we left our anchorage. We didn't sail out, we were towed. Tired of waiting for a wind, ashamed of inaction, embarrassed by abortive leave-takings, We wanted only to get out of it and off to sea. Rockwell, Kent, the pictures alone are worth the price of admission. North by East. Well, here's a book I'll bet you haven't heard of, which has affected me greatly. It's called The Boy, Me, and the Cat by Henry M. Plummer. Well, my father gave me this, it says in February 1981. The cruise of the Mascot, 1912 to 1913. The Mascot is a small gaff-rigged catboat that father and son, Henry M. Plummer and Henry M. Plummer Jr., sailed down the intercoastal waterway to Florida. It's written in a delightfully naive style. I think this book was lost for a long time until it was recognized for what it is, which is a really good account with a cute, as it were, title, The Boy, Me, and the Cat. The cat comes to, well, I won't tell you what happens to the cat. Scotty, I think is his name. What I will tell you is why I can hardly read this book now without extreme emotion. Here's the dedication, written to a 13 or 14-year-old boy. To my companion Henry M. Plummer Jr., who, with unfailing patience, bore with my fretful exactions, and was ever ready to lend a willing hand, who joined me in love for Scotty, and in grief at her death, that's the cat, to this boy who is my joy and my pride. Well, all right, let's try that again without the emotion. To this boy who is my joy and my pride, this log is lovingly dedicated by his father. Very nice. The Boy, Me, and the Cat. But some years later, when the book was rediscovered by publishers, the New Bedford, Massachusetts of May 9th, 1928 reported the following. Mr. Plummer's son, Henry M. Plummer Jr., who appears in this book, was an aviator in the Great World War, killed in action. When you read the book, you get to know these guys. On a lighter note, let's move our perspective worldwide. And from this very bunk here in this very harbor in Southern California, and that we will do. And this is a great gift for anyone who keeps talking about sailing around the world. Jimmy Cornell's World Cruising Routes. This book should not be allowed to exist because it tells you how to sail around the world and to anywhere you want to, with the directions and even waypoints in the newest edition. And I think that if you give this to somebody, his wife's going to say, George, why are you reading that book about world cruising routes by Jimmy Cornell? Here's one. Route PS 106, Queensland to Papua New Guinea. There are two main routes crossing the Coral Sea from Queensland to Papua New Guinea. One that goes direct to the capital port. No. We oughtn't to read that too often. Wanderlust gets going. And I think that now we've finished this essay of Christmas books, I shall go home and, instead of sailing around the world, take a nap. For people who already own a boat, I think there's one indispensable choice for a gift book, and that is Nigel Calder's Boatowners, Mechanical and Electrical Manual, How to Maintain, Repair, and Improve Your Boat's Essential Systems. Calder did a huge amount of work on this. The illustrations are superb, and it saved my bacon several times. It runs from the mundane conversion table from inches to millimeter, which you probably don't have on board if you don't have this book, to how to fix all sorts of things. Calcium is beginning to form in this Y valve, it says here. Well, for a boat owner, it's a gold mine of information. How to use a multimeter. Well, I consult this myself about once a week. In the expanding universe we hope for our friends, there are 5 or 6 classic sailing books which we can all enjoy, in which many of us have reread every 10 years all of our lives. One, the charming one, is Vito Dumas, Alone Through the Roaring Forties. Dumas is an Argentine who, during World War II, with no money, got a really leaky wooden boat, padded himself with newspapers against the cold, and set off in the lower latitudes to sail around the world alone. And he's a single-hander, but a very social sort of a person, of eccentric bent, Italian background, thought he might very well be descended from Italian royalty, which when Italian royalty heard that, they were surprised. I like James Baldwin's book, Across Islands and Oceans, for the sheer narrative skill and hard work he put into telling this tale. He can write, too. He sailed around the world and then took his notes many years later and made this volume. He is a hiker. That is, his idea was sail around the world on every island, hike to the very top of it. He's also a pretty good amateur archaeologist. And I was surprised to find this little boat rigged up on a minimum of money, had achieved more than most of the well-known voyages that we know. Across Islands and Oceans by James Baldwin. An underrated and overlooked classic is the Bounty Trilogy by Nordoff and Hall. You know, there have been 3, 4, 5 movie versions made of this, which may turn your idea of Fletcher Christian into Marlon Brando or Clark Gable. But these guys, Nordoff and Hall, were historical novelists who took the data about this true story and were able to turn it into a really first-class historical novel in 3 parts. As you may know yourself, this is the story of Bligh Christian, the mutiny on the Bounty vessel, the incredible trip that Captain Bligh pulled off 6,000 miles in an open boat, which is a separate story, and then Pitcairn Island, the 3rd in the trilogy, all in this one volume, in which things come to a pretty pass in paradise for the mutineers. An awfully good read, and one that anyone with an interest in books, you don't even need an interest in yachting, could thoroughly enjoy. Once is Enough is Miles and Beryl Smeeton's 2 attempts to round Cape Horn on their boat Suhang. This is every sailor has read this, and when they hear that you have picked it up, they just shake their heads. Full of good information. You know, if you ever wonder why so many British naval officers wrote these books, sailed off and had great adventures after World War II, Smeeton reveals that it had to do with the fact that you couldn't get your money out of Britain. But one workaround was to buy a boat somewhere else, and that saved you post-war dough. Miles is the captain. Beryl is the brains and the brawn. Good book. Now, of course, Joshua Slocum's story of Spray and sailing around the world is probably the most classic book in the sailing literature, but not so well known is the follow-up account of his son, Victor Slocum, who grew up on some of the boats that Joshua sailed, and whose insights and sort of parallel history are absolutely fascinating, even as a first read. You don't have to have read the original Slocum biographical story to really follow Victor's account. It makes a wonderful companion to a sailor who might already have Around the World by Slocum, and certainly a good introduction to the eccentricities common to these wonderful sailors at the turn of the century. Joshua Slocum is such a famous name that Bernard Moitessier, whose book is also highly recommended, although a little philosophical for some people's taste, named his book Joshua. Well, now we come to people who like to read. Moby Dick. Now, I understand that Moby Dick is a long book, but what I am advocating is giving it to everybody you know. And this particular edition, this is a leather-bound edition of Moby Dick, unabridged, by Herman Melville, by the Easton Press, EASTON Press in Norwalk, Connecticut. And if you were to go onto Amazon, you would find more than 100 versions of this edition for about $15. The type is large. The paper is a high class. The leather is real leather. And of the 4 copies and editions of Moby Dick that I happen to have, this is the most readable and the best gift. I can't advocate for Moby Dick, the whale. It's literature. If people are put off by it at age 25, they may be put off by it at age 30 as well, but I guarantee you at some time down the course of their lives, as the years pass by, they will find one moment when they reach for this book, pick it up, and understanding and interest blossoms. Slowly wading through the meadows of Brit, the Pequod still held on her way northeastward toward the island of Java, a gentle air impelling her keel, so that in the surrounding serenity her 3 tall tapering masts mildly waved to that languid breeze as 3 mild palms on a plain. Nobody writes like that. The greatest novelist of the sea in our time is a fellow named Patrick O'Brian. He wrote 20 novels about the Napoleonic Wars, all of which are works, I think, of literature. They pop up in these paperbacks. Here's Desolation Island. No one who likes to read books fails to appreciate the extraordinary erudition and hilarity and character development and flat-out naval action scenes. Boom, boom, bang, bang, duck now. Oh, Splinter's got you, has it? Then these books. This is Desolation Island, a good first choice. The movie, what's it called, Master and Commander, I think, is very good. Which is not something you often say about nautically themed things nowadays, which tend to wander off into the Lifetime channel. And it contains, this story, one of 20, contains, in part, that awful sea chase into Antarctica, pursued by a larger vessel. One of the most dramatic seaway sequences I can think of in literature. And to go along with Patrick O'Brian, and if perhaps the recipient already has a few O'Brian books, there are 2 essential companion books. One, Harbors and High Seas, by an atlas and geographical guide to the Aubrey Maturin novels of Patrick O'Brian. Well, I have lots of trouble remembering where Desolation Island is and how it relates to, say, Sri Lanka, or the action off the Galapagos, or did we get to the Marquesas or not? And in all these novels, Aubrey and Maturin do go lots of places, along with the Royal Navy, chasing the French and such, And this will tell you where it is that they are. From Sardinia to Minorca. Along with that, because the nautical terminology in O'Brien is extraordinarily detailed and complex, is a book called A Sea of Words, which contains the definitions for all that stuff nobody can understand. It's not just you and me. Bow and quarter line, the position of ships in a column, when each successive vessel has its bow a little to one side and behind the beam of the one in front. Offing, the part of the distant sea visible from the shore or beyond the anchoring ground. Also, the distance a vessel keeps from land or other navigational hazard, the offing. Well, I see it says oldster, a midshipman with experience, one of 4 years standing. Well then, I seem to qualify as an oldster. Oh, but you already knew that. Well, those books are certainly a good start on anyone's library, and the receipt of any one of them, if your friend, acquaintance, spouse, brother-in-law, or uncle has any brains at all, really, will be one of tremendous, generous approval of you for all time. You might add to this with 2 books of my own, which I dare say, although in awfully good company here, Philosophy of Sailing and Alone Together, will certainly, well, what can we say about them? You know the author.
It's a quiet afternoon, so let's go through the books. Adlard Coles, Heavy Weather Sailing. Okay, Adlard Coles, this is a 1974, the information is out of date, but I think I'd prefer to have this read to me on my deathbed rather than in a boat. Pretty scary. You know, this is Thucydides, the landmark edition. To appreciate both Thucydides and Herodotus, any of the ancient Greeks, you really need maps. And these, I wouldn't say the translation is great, of course I don't speak Greek, but the maps are sensational. And both the landmark Thucydides, and this is the landmark new edition I just got of the campaigns of Alexander, which I brought along to hope to get into. The only thing wrong with these landmark editions is that the maps are great, but I don't know who did it, maybe the general editor Strassler, some scholar, but if you want to find out all about Strassler's opinion on something or anything cited in the text, just go to 32.b.16, parenthesis 3, A, B.C, sub parenthesis D, and you'll find it. I don't know why he did it that way, it's insane. The Great Captain's terrible book, don't buy it. This is a guy named Victor Clark, who I read many years ago and started again, The Saga of Solace. He sailed around the world in the late 40s after the war, as so many of these guys did, and picked up a local guy and had some adventures in an old leaky wooden boat. Not a really great read. Gypsy Moth Circles the World, we all know what that is. This is Joshua Slocum's son who wrote this, Victor Slocum, which will reveal to you, as a great fan of Spray and Captain Slocum, how much balderdash there is in Slocum's own account. The guy was world famous when he made his round-the-world solo venture. He obviously wrote a book to become a bestseller, all that stuff about what will it pay. It's very interesting, kind of a Yankee gamesmanship, I think. Oh dear. Yes, Martin Heidegger has no place on a boat. This is really good. You know, I'm not a religious guy, really, at all, but William James, a turn-of-the-century thinker, went around and talked to all people about their religious experiences, the varieties of religious experience. In all cultures, they're all speaking in tongues, they're running around ranting and raving. Some of the founders of some of the pilgrims were the craziest. He concluded in his own opinion when asked after this, he was at Columbia at the time, I think, William James was, that for whatever it's worth, people who had a belief, and I think it was James who said the difference between that there's facts and then belief. Anyway, the point James was making, that people were happier and got more done when they had a complete belief, even if it flew in the face of wisdom or observation. That's what he found. Yes, you know, you have to really have... Bertrand Russell is one of the funniest, best writers of the public intellectuals, and this, A History of Western Philosophy, is just grand on every single philosopher you may have bumped into and not known anything about. It's Russell who says something like this about Nietzsche. He says that Friedrich Nietzsche's, as I have just expounded, it may not seem consistent. If so, it is not my fault. The March Up Country, I haven't read this, brought it along. This is you know, the famous Xenophon. So he was told by Socrates, go west, young man, sort of, actually, because he went east. But have a good time. The Oracle at Delphi says it's okay. So Xenophon went off just about the time Greece was committing suicide, somewhere around 400 BC, and got involved in this 10,000-mile march, which they were almost all killed. The March Up Country, Xenophon, he was there, eyewitness account, good adventure story, I am told. Birds. Well, you got to have a field guide of birds. Don't go anywhere, I'm serious, without Plutarch's Lives. I think that on here it says Dryden calls it, somebody calls it, the Bible of heroes, and it really is. If you are down, pick up Plutarch at any point, and anybody he wrote about will make human behavior seem not only rational but exciting, and plus which you won't seem so completely crazy once you read about Alcibiades. Psychologically, the best of the yachtsman adventurers, Moitessier, The Long Way. This is the one where Bernard goes into the round the world race and just keeps on going. Moby Dick, we can't say anything about the whale. The whale is a... So if you're going on a long cruise and you don't understand existentialism, which I must say no one does, then you have to have Sartre's only simpatico and understandable explanation of what his whole world is about, which is called, in this translation, which is part of the problem, existentialism is a humanism. Now, let's take the translator who wrote that and hang her upside down and beat her with birch sticks. Existentialism is a humanism. Well, actually, existentialism is quite understandable if you read this lecture transposed for lay people. Cicero, my hero. If I really wanted to be Cicero, and this is the best selected works, a very good introduction to him. Don't forget, I'm 71. He's very good on old age. But the real thing that he's good at is taking people on. He called Mark Antony all of these names. That's how they called the second Philippic against Antony. I mean, he called Mark Antony a fool. Say, listen to what I think about you, Mark Antony. This is Rome, right? I think you're a fool, a liar. I think the fatuity of your remarks is unprecedented. I think you should really go away, drop dead. You're destroying Rome. Well, they say Cicero wasn't very physically courageous, but his brain was courageous. And I always wanted to be him until Mark Antony said, you know, I think I've had enough of this intellectual dickhead with 15 villas, and sent some guys out to intercept him, and they grabbed him off of his chase near a hedge and cut his head off. And Mark Antony nailed his tongue and his hands, which had spoken and written bad about Mark Antony, over the entrance to the Roman Senate. There's a warning I take seriously. The Fall, I don't know why this is here, but it's a good book by Camus or Camus or however you want. Here's the other volume of Plutarch, Don't Live Without It. You know, if I'm alone at the moment, but if I wanted one companion who wasn't Lindsay Lohan, it would be Charles Darwin. This guy, and this is the Voyage of the Beagle, which was, you know, preceded by 30 or 40 years, Origin of Species. This is the one where he's 24 years old, he signs on as a botanist, and goes around the world, and all he does, his whole method, personality, biography, autobiography, his history, his future, His whole method is to look at what he's looking at, think about it, put it in a place, and then go and ask if anyone else has any opinions about what he's observed. I mean, for example, he finds horse fossils in South America in 1840 or something. Well, we all know that horses were imported into the New World by the Spanish, and there were 10,000 horses by that time in South America. Darwin said, well, how can it be that these are 10,000-year-old horse fossils? And the answer is, he concluded, that there were horses on the American continent, but they went extinct there, but not in Europe. The Europeans brought the horses over, and they flourished once again. I find that kind of commonsensical approach fascinating. And I think it's something we can all learn. Norton Book of the Sea, it's terrible. I picked this up the other night. We were having a bit of heavy weather. I was perhaps a bit discouraged, not feeling well, not eating much. The bloody boat was leaking. Whenever I'm feeling bad, I pick up Alone Across the Atlantic, which is one of Chichester's first sailing books, in which I think he does everything wrong that you can do. He wins the race, but the chronicle of Chichester being surprised by things is amazing. And he's not a very good writer, but as I recall, oh yes, my father gave me this in 1963. These guys had all come back from the war. They wanted to do things. I think it's interesting that they should, and that they could have written books, and that now in 2014 people like me and us are reading them.